My name is Samantha Richardson, and I'm 24 years old. I never thought a family dinner could destroy everything I believed about the people who raised me. The dining room felt suffocating that evening, with Mom nervously rearranging her napkin and Dad avoiding my questions about Grandma's inheritance. When I finally cornered him about the $75,000 she left for my education, his response shattered my world completely. "We used your money," he said casually, like discussing the weather. "Kitchen remodel, Disney trip, new car payment. Family money, you know." Mom stayed silent, staring at her plate while my heart pounded with disbelief. Then Grandpa Wilson, who'd been quietly observing from the corner, suddenly stood up. "Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and unexpected justice, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride, and don't forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than a roller coaster. Trust me, you won't believe what Grandpa does next." The silence that followed Dad's confession felt like an eternity. I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, trying to process what he'd just admitted. $75,000. Gone. The money Grandma specifically left for my graduate school dreams, wiped away for their comfort and entertainment. Dad Richard continued eating his pot roast as if he hadn't just dropped a nuclear bomb on my future, while Mom Linda's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "You what?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The same clock that Grandma had wound every Sunday for 30 years, the same clock that now seemed to mock the passage of time since her death 6 months ago. Dad looked up from his plate with that infuriating casual expression he wore when explaining why he'd forgotten to pick me up from soccer practice or missed my high school graduation speech. "Sammy, don't be dramatic," he said, using that condescending tone that had grated on my nerves since childhood. "It was just sitting there in the account. We had expenses. The kitchen was falling apart, the Disney trip was already booked, and Linda's car died right after the funeral. What were we supposed to do?" He gestured around the newly renovated kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, the very improvements that had consumed my educational inheritance. I thought about the past 6 months, working double shifts at the diner and the bookstore, living on ramen noodles and generic cereal, applying for dozens of scholarships that never seemed to materialize. Every night I'd fallen asleep exhausted, comforting myself with the knowledge that Grandma's gift would make graduate school possible. I'd already researched programs, contacted advisors, even started the application process for Columbia's journalism program. Now, watching Dad wipe barbecue sauce from his chin with the expensive cloth napkins Mom had bought during their shopping spree, I realized my struggles had been completely unnecessary. "That money wasn't yours," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Grandma left it specifically for my education. She made me promise I'd use it to pursue my dreams, not to fund your home improvement projects." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound, especially knowing that while I'd been surviving on 3 hours of sleep and instant coffee, they'd been planning their next vacation with my inheritance. Mom finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were going to pay it back, sweetheart. It was just temporary." But she couldn't meet my eyes, and I noticed how her hands shook as she lit another cigarette. This wasn't temporary borrowing. This was calculated theft from their own daughter. The woman who'd once lectured me about the importance of honesty and responsibility had helped steal my future. My younger brother Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pushing food around his plate without eating. At 19, he was closer to our parents than I'd ever been, but even he looked disturbed by their casualness. "Did you know about this?" I asked him directly. His guilty expression told me everything I needed to know. Even my baby brother had been aware of their deception while I'd been working myself to exhaustion. "It's complicated, Sam," Tyler mumbled, still avoiding eye contact. "They said they'd handle it, that you didn't need to worry about money stuff." The realization that my entire family had conspired to keep me in the dark while watching me struggle financially was almost more devastating than the theft itself. Every concerned question about my finances, every offer of a small loan they claimed they couldn't afford, had been an elaborate act. Dad leaned back in his chair, adopting that superior posture he used when asserting his authority. "Look, Princess, when you have a real job and real responsibilities, you'll understand that sometimes families have to make tough decisions. That money helped improve the house value, which benefits everyone." The Disney trip was a family bonding experience that Tyler needed after losing his grandmother. Everything we did was for this family's benefit. The audacity of his justification made my blood boil. A family bonding experience that I hadn't even been invited to because I'd been working extra shifts to afford my rent. House improvements that would benefit everyone except the person who'd actually paid for them. I thought about Grandma's hands, weathered from decades of work as a seamstress, carefully saving every penny she could for my future. She'd lived in that tiny apartment with the broken air conditioner and the leaky faucet, refusing our offers to help her move somewhere nicer because she wanted to leave me something substantial. "She saved that money for 40 years, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. 40 years of skipping meals and denying herself basic comforts because she believed in my potential. And you spent it on granite countertops and a vacation to Disney World." The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd taken their son to the happiest place on earth using money meant to secure their daughter's future happiness. Grandpa Wilson hadn't said a word during this entire exchange, but I could see his jaw tightening with each revelation. His weathered hands gripped the edge of the table, and his usually warm blue eyes had turned cold as winter steel. Dad's father had always been the steady presence in our chaotic family, the voice of reason when emotions ran high. But something about his stillness now felt different, dangerous even. "How much is left?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer from their defensive postures. Mom's tears started flowing freely now, black mascara creating trails down her cheeks. Dad shifted in his seat, suddenly looking less confident about his position. "Well, there were some unexpected expenses," he began, but I cut him off. "How much, Dad?" "Nothing," Tyler answered for him, his voice filled with shame. "They spent it all. The kitchen cost $30,000, Disney was $8,000, the car was $25,000, and they used the rest for credit card payments and other stuff." My brother's honesty hit like a physical blow, confirming what I'd feared most. The room fell silent except for Mom's quiet sobbing and the relentless ticking of Grandma's clock. $75,000, representing decades of sacrifice and love, completely gone. My future, my dreams, my grandmother's final gift to me, all consumed by their selfish desires and financial irresponsibility. As I sat there processing the magnitude of their betrayal, I noticed Grandpa Wilson's chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He was standing up, slowly but deliberately, and the expression on his face was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The sound of Grandpa Wilson's chair hitting the floor echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. At 78 years old, my grandfather rarely moved with such force, but the fury radiating from his 6-foot frame filled the room with electric tension. His normally gentle demeanor had vanished, replaced by something primal and protective that made even Dad shrink back in his seat. 43 years, Grandpa said, his voice low and controlled but carrying the weight of barely contained rage. 43 years I watched my wife save every penny she could for that girl's future. 43 years of her working double shifts at the textile mill, skipping birthday presents for herself, wearing the same coat through 10 winters because she was putting money aside for Samantha's education. His faded blue eyes locked onto Dad's face with laser intensity. "And you spent it on granite countertops." Dad tried to maintain his defensive posture, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead. "Pop, you don't understand the financial pressures we're under. The mortgage payments, Tyler's expenses, Samantha's college loans were already helping with." The lies rolled off his tongue so easily that I wondered how many other deceptions I'd missed over the years. "Don't you dare lie to me, Richard." Grandpa's voice cut through Dad's excuses like a blade. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a manila folder that looked suspiciously official. I've been watching your financial behavior for the past 6 months, ever since Dorothy's funeral. Did you think I wouldn't notice the sudden home improvements? The new furniture? Linda's designer handbags that cost more than your mother's monthly grocery budget? Mom's face went white as Grandpa spread documents across the dining table. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, and what looked like legal paperwork created a damning paper trail of their spending spree. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago when I started suspecting you'd touched Samantha's inheritance. Every purchase, every transaction, every lie you've told this family is documented right here. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Grandpa had known about their theft for months and had been quietly building a case against his own son. The methodical way he arranged the papers spoke of careful planning and deep betrayal. Tyler leaned forward to examine the documents, his eyes widening as he recognized receipts from stores and restaurants he'd visited with our parents. This is Dorothy's will, Grandpa continued, holding up an official document. Notarized and filed with the county clerk. It specifically states that the $75,000 in her savings account is to be used solely for Samantha's higher education expenses. Not home improvements. Not vacations. Not paying off your gambling debts, Richard. Gambling debts? I stared at Dad in shock. This was the first I'd heard of any gambling problem, but Mom's expression confirmed Grandpa's accusation. How many other secrets had they been hiding while I struggled to make ends meet? Dad's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. You had no right to investigate us like common criminals. We're family, for Christ's sake. That money was just sitting there, and we had legitimate expenses. But his voice lacked conviction now, especially with the evidence spread out before us. Legitimate expenses, Grandpa repeated, picking up a receipt. Like this $2,000 shopping spree at the casino gift shop? Or this $1,500 dinner at that fancy steakhouse you took Linda to for your anniversary while Samantha was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner? His research had been thorough, documenting not just the major purchases but the smaller indulgences that revealed their true priorities. Tyler grabbed one of the credit card statements, his face growing pale as he read. Dad, this shows you withdrew $5,000 from an ATM at the racetrack. You told me that money was for my textbooks next semester. The realization that our parents had been lying to both of us created a new bond between Tyler and me, united in our shared betrayal. I've already consulted with Margaret Caldwell at Morrison & Associates, Grandpa announced, producing a business card from his wallet. She specializes in estate law and financial fraud. According to her preliminary review, what you've done constitutes theft, embezzlement, and possibly fraud since you forged Samantha's signature on some of these bank documents. The mention of forged signatures made my stomach drop. What signatures? I demanded, reaching for the bank papers. There, on several withdrawal slips, was what looked like my signature authorizing transfers from the inheritance account. The handwriting was close but not quite right, with subtle differences that proved the forgery. Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as a whimper. We were desperate, Wilson. The credit cards were maxed out, the second mortgage payment was due, and Richard's job was threatened if he didn't pay back the money he'd borrowed from the company account. Each revelation painted a darker picture of their financial irresponsibility and criminal behavior. So you stole from your daughter instead of facing the consequences of your actions, Grandpa said, his disgust evident. You watched her work herself into exhaustion, worry about her future, apply for scholarships she didn't need, all while you were spending her inheritance on luxuries. Dad finally exploded, his carefully maintained facade crumbling. This is our house, our family, our business. You have no right to interfere, old man. Samantha is my daughter, and I'll handle her finances however I see fit. The possessive way he spoke about me, as if I were property rather than a person, revealed the depth of his entitled thinking. Your daughter is 24 years old and legally entitled to her inheritance, Grandpa shot back. But more importantly, she's my granddaughter, and I'll be damned if I let you destroy her future the way you've destroyed everything else you've touched. The protective fury in his voice brought tears to my eyes, the first time in months I'd felt truly supported by a family member. Grandpa turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Samantha, you have two choices. We can handle this privately, with Richard and Linda repaying every penny plus interest within 60 days, or we can file criminal charges and let the courts sort it out. Either way, you're getting your money back. The power shift in the room was palpable. For the first time since the conversation began, I felt like I had allies instead of adversaries. But looking at the mountain of evidence and the desperate expressions on my parents' faces, I realized this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Grandpa Wilson wasn't finished. As I processed the revelation about forged signatures and gambling debts, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out another stack of documents that made my parents visibly flinch. The systematic way he'd organized his investigation spoke of months of careful planning, and I was beginning to understand that what I'd discovered tonight was just the tip of the iceberg. Since we're putting all the cards on the table, Grandpa said, spreading out what appeared to be Tyler's bank statements, let's discuss the $18,000 you've withdrawn from Tyler's college savings account over the past 4 months. My brother's face went ashen as he grabbed the papers, his hands shaking as he read through the transactions. You said those withdrawals were for my textbooks and lab fees, Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. The betrayal in his eyes mirrored my own as he realized our parents had been systematically robbing both of us while maintaining their facade of struggling but caring parents. Mom buried her face in her hands, her sobbing intensifying. We were going to replace it all, she kept repeating, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Dad sat in stunned silence, apparently realizing that Grandpa's investigation had uncovered far more than he'd anticipated. There's more, Grandpa continued relentlessly. Linda, would you like to explain to your children about the insurance claim you filed last month? The one claiming that Dorothy's diamond ring and pearl necklace were stolen during a break-in that never actually occurred? He produced a copy of an insurance form with Mom's signature, claiming thousands of dollars in stolen jewelry that was currently sitting in their bedroom safe. The insurance fraud revelation hit me like a physical blow. Grandma's jewelry, pieces she'd worn every day and had specifically left to me in her will, were being used in an elaborate scheme to generate more cash for my parents' spending habits. Where are Grandma's rings? I demanded, my voice rising with each word. Safe in our bedroom, Dad muttered, finally finding his voice. We weren't really going to go through with the claim. It was just backup in case we couldn't replace the money fast enough. But Grandpa's documentation showed the claim had already been submitted and was under review by the insurance company. Tyler stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward. I'm done with this, he announced, his young voice cracking with emotion. I've been lying for you people for months, telling my friends I couldn't afford to go out because we were struggling financially, when the whole time you were stealing from us to pay for your gambling addiction and shopping sprees. Grandpa's next revelation was even more devastating. Samantha, have you checked your credit report recently? The specific way he asked the question sent a chill down my spine. I shook my head, suddenly afraid of what he might have discovered. According to this report from Experian, he continued, holding up another official document, you currently have 4 credit cards in your name with a combined debt of $32,000. Cards that were opened using your social security number and a forged driver's license application while you were away at college. The room spun around me as I processed this information. Identity theft on top of everything else. Not only had they stolen my inheritance, but they'd also destroyed my credit and saddled me with debt I knew nothing about. For credit cards? I whispered, reaching for the credit report with trembling hands. The detailed report showed a pattern of systematic identity theft spanning 3 years. Department store cards, gas station credit cards, and 2 major bank cards, all opened with fake addresses and my personal information. The spending patterns revealed expensive dinners, luxury shopping sprees, and cash advances that coincided perfectly with my parents' lifestyle improvements. "This is why you've been denied for apartment rentals," Grandpa explained gently. "Your credit score is 412 because of these delinquent accounts. Meanwhile, Richard and Linda have been using your good name to fund their irresponsible lifestyle." Tyler grabbed his own credit report from the pile. "They did it to me too," he said, his voice filled with disgust. "2 cards with $8,000 in debt. No wonder my student loan application was rejected last month." The scope of our parents' deception was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Dad finally attempted a defense, but his words came out weak and unconvincing. "We needed the credit for emergencies. Both of you were away, not using your credit anyway. We fully intended to pay everything off before you needed to apply for loans or apartments. Emergencies like gambling at the Riverboat Casino 3 times a week?" Grandpa shot back, producing photographs that showed Dad entering and leaving the local casino on multiple dates. "Or emergencies like Linda's weekly spa treatments and shopping trips to Chicago?" More photographs showed Mom at expensive salons and boutique stores, shopping bags in hand, clearly enjoying the fruits of their theft. The evidence was overwhelming and professionally documented. Grandpa had spent months building an airtight case against his own son, motivated by love for his granddaughter and respect for his deceased wife's wishes. The private investigator he'd hired had been thorough, capturing not just financial records but photographic evidence of my parents' spending habits. "There's one more thing," Grandpa said, his voice growing even more serious. "The house refinancing you completed 2 months ago. Linda, did you tell Samantha that you listed her as a co-signer and primary resident to qualify for the lower interest rate?" Mom's face went completely white, confirming another layer of fraud I hadn't even suspected. "The mortgage fraud meant that I was legally liable for their house payments, tied to a property I'd never lived in as an adult and couldn't afford. If they defaulted on the payments, my already destroyed credit would take another massive hit, and I could potentially be held responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt." Tyler threw his credit report down on the table in disgust. "How could you do this to us? We're your children. We trusted you." His voice broke as the full weight of their betrayal sank in. These weren't desperate parents making difficult choices, these were calculated criminals who happened to be related to us. Mom tried one last emotional manipulation, reaching across the table toward me with tears streaming down her face. "Baby, you have to understand, we were drowning. The medical bills from my surgery, your father's job troubles, the pressure of keeping this family together. We never meant for it to go this far." But Grandpa cut through her sob story with brutal efficiency. "Linda, I have documentation showing that your medical insurance covered 90% of your surgery costs, with a maximum out-of-pocket expense of $3,000. And Richard, your job troubles stem from the fact that you were caught embezzling from your company's petty cash fund. These aren't unfortunate circumstances, these are patterns of criminal behavior." The devastating truth was laid bare across the dining room table. My parents weren't struggling victims of circumstance, they were serial fraudsters who had systematically destroyed their children's financial futures to maintain their unsustainable lifestyle. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of their calculated betrayal, I realized that this dinner conversation had revealed the true nature of the people who raised me. The next few weeks turned into an all-out war that split our extended family down the middle. Dad wasted no time launching his counterattack, calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin to spin his version of events. According to his carefully crafted narrative, Grandpa Wilson was suffering from age-related paranoia and had enlisted me in a vindictive scheme to destroy the family over money that was rightfully theirs to manage. "Wilson's been getting confused lately," I overheard Dad telling Uncle Frank on the phone. "He's convinced that we're criminals when we just borrowed some money from Samantha's account. You know how old people get about finances. The casual way he dismissed Grandpa's sharp mind and thorough investigation infuriated me, especially since Wilson was sharper at 78 than Dad had ever been. Mom took a different approach, reaching out to her sisters with tearful phone calls about how heartbroken she was that her ungrateful daughter was trying to send her own parents to prison over a simple misunderstanding. "We raised her, fed her, clothed her for 24 years, she sobbed to Aunt Jennifer. And this is how she repays us," siding with a bitter old man who's always hated Richard. Their divide-and-conquer strategy proved disturbingly effective. By the end of the second week, family gatherings had become hostile battlegrounds where relatives chose sides based on which version of events they'd heard first. Uncle Frank and Aunt Jennifer refused to speak to me directly, convinced that I was manipulating a vulnerable elderly man for financial gain. Meanwhile, Aunt Rebecca and Uncle Tom quietly reached out to express their support but admitted they were afraid to speak publicly against Dad's campaign. The conflict escalated when Dad contacted my supervisor at the bookstore, claiming concern about my mental health and suggesting that the stress of financial disagreements might be affecting my work performance. "I'm just worried about my daughter," he told Mr. Peterson with false sincerity. "She's been acting erratically lately, making wild accusations against her family. I thought you should know in case it affects her job." The character assassination attempt backfired when Mr. Peterson called me into his office to discuss Dad's concerns. After explaining the situation and showing him copies of Grandpa's evidence, my supervisor became one of my strongest supporters. "Your father tried to sabotage your employment based on lies," he said angrily. "That tells me everything I need to know about his character." Mom's social media warfare proved more damaging to family relationships. She posted carefully crafted Facebook updates that painted her and Dad as victims of elder abuse, claiming that Grandpa was forcing me to make false accusations under threat of being cut out of his will. "Pray for our family during this difficult time," she wrote. "Sometimes the people you love most can turn against you when money becomes more important than blood." The post generated dozens of supportive comments from family friends who didn't know the full story, creating a public narrative that cast my parents as suffering saints and me as a greedy manipulator. Several cousins shared the post with their own comments about the importance of respecting elders and staying loyal to family, clearly directed at my supposed betrayal. Tyler bore the worst of their retaliation. When he refused to support their version of events, they immediately cut off his college funding and kicked him out of the house. "If you want to side with your grandfather's lies, you can find somewhere else to live," Dad told him coldly. My 19-year-old brother ended up sleeping on friends' couches, working extra hours at his part-time job to afford basic necessities. The cruelest manipulation came when Grandpa suffered a stress-induced episode that required an emergency room visit. The combination of family conflict and the emotional toll of investigating his son's crimes had triggered severe chest pains and shortness of breath. While doctors confirmed it was anxiety-related rather than a heart attack, my parents immediately used the incident to support their elder abuse narrative. "Look what this situation has done to Wilson," Mom announced at the hospital, speaking loudly enough for other family members to hear. "The stress of these false accusations is literally killing him. How can Samantha live with herself knowing she's destroying an old man's health over money?" The performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with tears and concerned whispers about Grandpa's declining condition. But their manipulation backfired when Aunt Rebecca, who had been quietly supporting us, overheard Dad on the phone with his lawyer discussing how to have Grandpa declared mentally incompetent. "If we can prove the old man's not thinking clearly, we can get guardianship and make all this go away," she heard him say. The revelation that they were actively planning to exploit Grandpa's medical episode for legal advantage finally convinced several fence-sitting relatives that Dad's character was fundamentally corrupt. The workplace sabotage escalated when Dad contacted my professors at the community college where I was taking night classes, claiming that family stress was affecting my academic performance and that I might need special accommodations for my emotional instability. One professor called me in confusion, explaining that my father had suggested I was having a breakdown and might need medical leave. My father is currently under investigation for embezzlement and fraud, I explained calmly. He's attempting to discredit me because I've discovered his criminal behavior. My academic performance speaks for itself. The professor, impressed by my composure and consistency, became another ally who could verify my mental stability despite Dad's slander campaign. Mom's attempts to turn my former friends against me proved partially successful. Several childhood friends began treating me with suspicion after Mom reached out to their parents with concerned phone calls about my supposedly erratic behavior. I'm just worried about her mental health, she told Mrs. Anderson, mother of my high school best friend. She's making terrible accusations against people who love her. I think the stress might have caused some kind of breakdown. The social isolation was brutal. Friends who had known me for years began questioning whether there might be some truth to my parents' concerns about my stability. When I tried to explain the situation and show evidence of their crimes, some dismissed it as family drama that didn't concern them. Others seemed uncomfortable with the idea that parents could systematically defraud their own children, preferring to believe Mom's version that painted me as confused and vindictive. Tyler's courage in the face of their retaliation became my biggest source of strength. Despite being homeless and financially cut off, he refused to recant his support for the truth. They can take away my money and my housing, he told me defiantly, but they can't make me lie for them anymore. What they did to us was wrong, and everyone needs to know it. The legal threats escalated when Dad hired an attorney to explore suing both Grandpa and me for defamation and elder abuse. The attorney, apparently unaware of the mountain of evidence Grandpa had compiled, sent threatening letters demanding we cease making false accusations and public statements about their financial conduct. The legal intimidation was designed to silence us through fear of expensive court battles we couldn't afford. But Grandpa's response was swift and devastating. Margaret Caldwell, the estate attorney he'd consulted, fired back with a letter detailing the evidence of systematic fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement that we'd uncovered. She also pointed out that filing false legal threats against fraud victims could result in additional criminal charges and sanctions against Dad's attorney. As the family war raged around us, I began to understand that this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the fundamental question of what family really means. My parents had revealed themselves to be people who would destroy their children's futures to protect their own comfort, then wage psychological warfare against anyone who dared to hold them accountable. The battle was far from over, but the lines were clearly drawn. On one side stood my parents with their lies, manipulation, and legal threats. On the other side stood truth, justice, and a grandfather whose love for his family was stronger than his loyalty to a criminal son. By the fourth week of our family war, I was barely holding myself together. The combination of financial stress, social isolation, and constant attacks on my character had pushed me to the breaking point. Panic attacks struck without warning, leaving me gasping for breath in grocery store aisles or during college lectures. My grades began suffering as concentration became impossible, and several nights I found myself lying awake until dawn, replaying every hurtful accusation and family betrayal. The lowest point came when I suffered a complete breakdown during my shift at the diner. A customer had made a simple request for extra ketchup, but my exhausted mind interpreted it as criticism, and I burst into tears right there in the dining room. My manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, quickly ushered me into the back office where I sobbed uncontrollably for 20 minutes, unable to explain what was wrong without sounding completely insane. "Mija, you need help," she said gently, handing me tissues and a cup of strong coffee. "Whatever's happening in your life, you can't carry this burden alone anymore." Her kindness was the first genuine compassion I'd experienced in weeks, and it only made me cry harder as I realized how isolated I'd become. That evening, Grandpa Wilson insisted on driving me to meet with Margaret Caldwell, the estate attorney who'd been reviewing our case. Her law office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian building downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the river. Margaret herself was a striking woman in her mid-50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and sharp green eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. "Samantha, your grandfather has briefed me on your situation," she began, spreading our evidence across her massive mahogany desk. "What your parents have done goes far beyond simple family financial disagreements. This is a criminal enterprise that's been operating for years, and you're not their first victim." Margaret explained that her preliminary investigation had revealed a pattern of financial fraud spanning back to Dad's relationship with his deceased brother, my Uncle David. "Your father borrowed heavily from David's business 15 years ago, claiming it was for emergency medical expenses," she revealed. "When David died in that car accident, Richard inherited everything and conveniently forgot about the $70,000 he owed his brother's estate." The revelation that our family's criminal behavior had deeper roots was both shocking and oddly comforting. It proved that I wasn't overreacting or being vindictive. I was simply the latest target in a long history of financial exploitation. Margaret's professional validation of my experiences helped quiet the self-doubt that my parents' gaslighting had created. "We're not just talking about theft," Margaret continued, pulling out a legal pad covered with notes. "Identity theft, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, insurance fraud, and embezzlement from Richard's employer. Your parents have committed enough federal crimes to face significant prison time if we pursue this through the proper channels." Tyler, who had been staying with friends and working extra hours to survive, proved to be our secret weapon. Despite being homeless and financially desperate, my brother had been secretly recording conversations with our parents, capturing their admissions of guilt and discussions of cover-up strategies. His smartphone contained hours of audio evidence that would be devastating in court. "They think I'm too young and too scared to stand up to them," Tyler explained as Margaret reviewed his recordings. "But I've been documenting everything since that first dinner conversation. Every lie they've told relatives, every threat they've made, every admission of guilt when they thought no one important was listening." One recording was particularly damning. Dad could be heard clearly stating, "We'll just claim the old man is losing his mind. Samantha's young and emotional, so we can paint her as unstable. Tyler will come around when he realizes fighting us means staying homeless. We just need to discredit their credibility and this whole thing goes away." Margaret's eyes lit up as she listened to the recordings. These conversations show consciousness of guilt and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Your parents aren't just criminals, they're stupid criminals who documented their own crimes. The attorney's confidence was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful about our prospects for justice. The breakthrough came when Aunt Rebecca, Dad's younger sister, arrived unexpectedly at Margaret's office carrying a box of documents that would change everything. She'd been quietly investigating on her own after overhearing Dad's conversation about having Grandpa declared incompetent, and what she discovered was explosive. "I've been going through David's old papers since he died," Rebecca explained, her hands shaking as she opened the box. "I knew Richard had borrowed money from him, but I never realized the scope of the fraud. The documents revealed that Dad hadn't just failed to repay his brother's loan, he'd actively forged David's signature on business documents, transferred ownership of valuable assets to himself, and filed false insurance claims on David's behalf. Your uncle didn't die in a simple car accident, Rebecca continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He was driving to confront Richard about the missing money when he crashed. The last phone call on his record was to a private investigator he'd hired to look into Richard's financial activities. The implication hung heavy in the air that Dad's criminal behavior had indirectly contributed to his brother's death. Margaret reviewed Rebecca's documents with growing excitement. This establishes a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 15 years. It proves that what happened to Samantha wasn't a desperate mistake but part of a systematic scheme to defraud family members. The historical evidence would be crucial in court, demonstrating that my parents were career criminals rather than struggling family members who'd made poor choices. The most shocking revelation came when Rebecca produced copies of David's will, which had been mysteriously altered after his death. The original document left everything to his children, but the version filed with probate court named Dad as the primary beneficiary. Handwriting analysis would later prove that Dad had forged the alterations, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own nieces and nephews. "We're not just fighting for Samantha's inheritance anymore," Margaret announced, her legal mind clearly excited by the scope of the case. "We're looking at a multi-year conspiracy that's defrauded multiple family members. Your parents have been running a criminal enterprise disguised as family financial management." As we left Margaret's office that evening, I felt like a different person than the broken young woman who'd walked in hours earlier. Armed with legal representation, documented evidence, and unexpected allies, I was no longer a victim being gaslit by abusive parents. I was a plaintiff in a criminal case with the power to demand justice and accountability. Tyler looked older than his 19 years as we walked to Grandpa's car. "I'm scared about what happens next," he admitted, "but I'm more scared about what happens if we don't fight back. They've already destroyed so much, and they'll keep destroying until someone stops them." Grandpa Wilson, who had been unusually quiet during our meeting with Margaret, finally spoke as we drove through the downtown evening traffic. "Your grandmother would be proud of both of you," he said simply. "She always said that sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing, but it's still the only thing worth doing." His words carried the weight of decades of marriage to a woman who'd worked her entire life to leave something meaningful for her granddaughter. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Not because our problems were solved, but because I was no longer fighting alone. Margaret Caldwell, Aunt Rebecca, Tyler, and Grandpa Wilson had formed an unlikely alliance dedicated to exposing the truth and demanding justice. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted dramatically in our favor. Margaret Caldwell moved with the precision of a military strategist when she launched our legal counteroffensive. Within 48 hours of our meeting, she had filed a comprehensive complaint with the district attorney's office detailing the multiple felonies my parents had committed. The formal criminal charges included identity theft, embezzlement, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud, each carrying potential prison sentences that made my parents' casual dismissal of consequences seem absurdly naive. The morning after the charges were filed, 2 detectives arrived at my parents' house with a search warrant. I wasn't present for the raid, but Tyler's recordings from his friend's house across the street captured the chaos as investigators emerged with boxes of financial documents, computer hard drives, and shopping bags full of jewelry and luxury items purchased with stolen money. Mom could be heard screaming about harassment and invasion of privacy while Dad tried unsuccessfully to assert his rights as a victim of elder abuse. Margaret had coordinated the timing perfectly with the local media, ensuring that news cameras were positioned to capture my parents being led away in handcuffs. The footage made the evening news with the headline "Local couple arrested for systematic family fraud," and suddenly our private family nightmare became public knowledge. Dad's employer immediately terminated him after learning about the embezzlement charges, and Mom's part-time position at the church was quietly eliminated when congregation members expressed concern about her moral character. The court ordered immediate freezing of all my parents' assets, including their bank accounts, credit cards, and the equity in their house. Everything they'd purchased with stolen money became evidence in the criminal case, from the granite countertops in their kitchen to the designer handbags in Mom's closet. Within a week, they went from living comfortably on other people's money to surviving on public assistance and the grudging charity of relatives who still supported them. Tyler's secret recordings proved devastating when presented to the court. Margaret had edited together a compilation of the most damaging admissions, creating a 40-minute audio presentation that played Dad's voice clearly stating, "We took the money and spent it. If they want to call it theft, let them prove it in court." The recordings eliminated any possibility of claiming innocence or misunderstanding, forcing their attorney to focus on damage control rather than denial. The media attention brought unexpected allies out of the woodwork. A reporter from the local newspaper contacted Margaret after receiving tips from other families who suspected similar fraud by people in positions of trust. 3 other cases emerged of adult children discovering that parents or relatives had stolen their inheritances, student loan money, or insurance settlements while maintaining facades of financial struggle. Your parents aren't unique, Margaret explained as she showed me files from similar cases. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize because victims are often too embarrassed or conflicted to report it. Most people can't imagine their own parents systematically destroying their financial futures for personal gain. The revelation that we weren't alone in our experience was simultaneously comforting and horrifying. The investigation expanded when forensic accountants traced the flow of stolen money through multiple bank accounts and discovered evidence of money laundering. Dad had been moving funds between different accounts under false names, creating a paper trail that suggested sophisticated criminal planning rather than desperate improvisation. The complexity of the scheme impressed even experienced fraud investigators who'd seen every type of financial scam imaginable. Mom's attempt to flee became front-page news when she was arrested at the airport with $43,000 in cash hidden in her luggage. She'd apparently liquidated several secret accounts and was attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica when Border Patrol agents detained her based on the federal fraud charges. The dramatic arrest footage showed her being escorted through the terminal in handcuffs while dramatically protesting her innocence to news cameras. Dad's arrest came 2 hours later when he was caught withdrawing money from an ATM using a debit card linked to Tyler's college account. Despite the court order freezing all assets, he'd continued stealing right up until the moment police handcuffed him in the bank parking lot. The audacity of committing new crimes while already facing multiple felony charges demonstrated either complete stupidity or pathological inability to stop stealing from his children. The preliminary court hearings were packed with family members, media representatives, and curious community members who'd followed the story in local news. Margaret had prepared me extensively for testifying, but facing my parents across the courtroom was still emotionally devastating. They sat with their court-appointed attorney, looking smaller and more pathetic than I'd ever seen them, but their eyes still held hints of the entitlement and manipulation that had defined our relationship. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman with 20 years of experience handling fraud cases, made her position clear from the beginning. This court has reviewed the evidence in advance of these proceedings, she announced, and I must say that the scope and duration of the alleged criminal behavior is among the most egregious cases of family financial abuse I've encountered in my career. The judge's preliminary comments sent shockwaves through the courtroom and apparently convinced Dad's attorney that plea negotiations might be preferable to a full trial. During the first recess, I watched through the conference room window as their lawyer engaged in intense whispered conversations with my parents, their expressions growing more desperate as he explained the overwhelming evidence against them. Tyler's testimony was particularly powerful because of his youth and obvious sincerity. At 19, he came across as genuinely heartbroken by our parents' betrayal rather than vindictive or money-hungry. His voice broke as he described working extra hours to afford basic necessities while watching them enjoy expensive dinners purchased with money stolen from his college fund. I trusted them completely, Tyler said from the witness stand, his words carrying across the silent courtroom. When they told me money was tight, I believed them. When they said they couldn't afford to help with my expenses, I worked harder to support myself. I never imagined they were stealing from me to fund their gambling and shopping addictions. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Margaret worked with the district attorney to present evidence in chronological order, showing how my parents' criminal behavior had escalated over years from small deceptions to elaborate fraud schemes. Bank records, forged documents, recordings, and witness testimony created an overwhelming narrative of systematic family financial abuse. Aunt Rebecca's testimony about Uncle David's mysterious death and the altered will added a chilling element to the proceedings. While Dad couldn't be charged with causing David's accident, the evidence of fraud surrounding his brother's estate painted him as someone capable of exploiting even family tragedies for financial gain. The revelation that David had been driving to confront Richard about missing money when he crashed suggested that fraud had been destroying our family for much longer than anyone realized. The community reaction was swift and decisive. Dad's employer issued a public statement distancing themselves from his criminal behavior and announcing a full audit of company accounts to determine the scope of his embezzlement. Mom's church quietly removed her name from all volunteer positions and committee memberships, effectively expelling her from the community organization she'd used to maintain her reputation as a devoted mother and wife. Several local businesses that had extended credit or special arrangements to my parents based on their community standing demanded immediate payment or threatened legal action. The ripple effects of their criminal exposure spread through every aspect of their lives, destroying the social and professional relationships they'd cultivated while living on stolen money. As I sat in the courtroom watching my parents face the consequences of their actions, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief. Justice was finally being served, but it came at the cost of completely destroying what remained of our family relationships. The people who had raised me, who I'd loved and trusted despite their flaws, were revealed to be career criminals who had systematically betrayed everyone who cared about them. The trial began on a gray October morning 6 months after that fateful dinner conversation that had changed everything. Margaret Caldwell had spent weeks preparing our case with the methodical precision of a master chess player, anticipating every possible defense strategy and counter-argument that my parents' legal team might attempt. The courtroom was packed with family members, community supporters, and media representatives who'd followed our story from the beginning. Judge Morrison called the court to order with an announcement that set the tone for the entire proceedings. This case involves allegations of systematic financial fraud spanning multiple years and multiple victims. The court expects all parties to conduct themselves with appropriate gravity given the serious nature of these charges. Her stern demeanor made it clear that she had little patience for the manipulation tactics that had worked on our family for so long. The prosecution's opening statement painted a devastating picture of calculated criminal behavior disguised as family financial management. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh methodically outlined how Richard and Linda Richardson had systematically stolen from their own children, forged legal documents, committed identity theft, and defrauded insurance companies while maintaining public personas as struggling but devoted parents. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," DA Walsh began, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "this is not a case about family disagreements over money. This is a case about parents who treated their children like personal ATM machines, stealing their futures to fund gambling addictions, luxury purchases, and elaborate deceptions. The evidence will show that the defendants are career criminals who happen to be related to their victims." Dad's defense attorney, a nervous young man named James Crawford who'd been assigned by the public defender's office, attempted to frame the case as a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a vindictive grandfather and emotionally unstable young woman. His opening statement fell flat when he tried to suggest that my parents had simply made poor financial decisions under stress rather than committing deliberate crimes. "The state wants you to believe that Richard and Linda Richardson are master criminals," Crawford argued unconvincingly, "but the evidence will show that they are simply parents who made mistakes while trying to keep their family together during difficult financial times. Their actions may have been misguided, but they were motivated by love and desperation, not criminal intent." The prosecution's case unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of evidence. Margaret had worked with forensic accountants, handwriting experts, and digital forensics specialists to create an overwhelming documentation of criminal behavior. Bank records showed the exact movement of stolen money from inheritance and college fund accounts to personal spending on gambling, luxury items, and vacations. Forged signatures on legal documents were proven through handwriting analysis that revealed systematic attempts to impersonate both Tyler and me on financial forms. Tyler's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Now 20 years old and working full-time to support himself through college, he took the witness stand with quiet dignity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. His voice was steady as he described years of believing his parents' lies about financial struggles while watching them enjoy expensive lifestyle improvements funded by stolen money. I worked 40 hours a week during my senior year of high school because they told me we couldn't afford my college expenses, Tyler testified, his words carrying across the silent courtroom. I applied for dozens of scholarships, took out student loans, and ate rice and beans for dinner most nights to save money. The whole time, they were spending my college fund on casino trips and shopping sprees. The defense's cross-examination of Tyler backfired spectacularly when Crawford tried to suggest that my brother was exaggerating the financial impact of our parents' theft. Tyler calmly produced his own financial records showing how he'd struggled to afford basic necessities while our parents purchased luxury items with his money. Are you suggesting I should be grateful that my parents stole my college fund? Tyler asked quietly, his question hanging in the air as several jury members shook their heads in disgust at the defense strategy. My own testimony focused on the systematic identity theft and the devastating impact on my credit score and future plans. Margaret had prepared me to speak clearly about the practical consequences of financial fraud, helping the jury understand that this wasn't just about money but about the deliberate destruction of opportunities and dreams. I was denied for 3 apartment rentals because of the credit card debt they'd created in my name, I explained to the jury. I couldn't qualify for graduate school loans because my credit score had been destroyed by accounts I never opened. Every aspect of my adult life has been impacted by their criminal behavior. The prosecution's expert witnesses provided technical testimony that eliminated any possibility of claiming innocent mistakes. A forensic handwriting expert demonstrated how the forged signatures showed deliberate attempts to replicate our handwriting rather than accidental similarities. A digital forensics specialist testified about deleted computer files that showed Dad researching how to forge legal documents and avoid detection for financial crimes. Perhaps most damaging was the testimony from Detective Sarah Martinez, the financial crimes investigator who'd led the case. She explained how the evidence revealed a sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than desperate parents making poor choices. In 20 years of investigating financial fraud, I've rarely seen such systematic and calculated criminal behavior within a family setting, she testified. The defendants demonstrated clear consciousness of guilt and sophisticated knowledge of how to exploit family relationships for financial gain. The defense case was brief and ineffective. Crawford called only 2 witnesses, a character witness who testified about my parents' involvement in church activities, and a psychologist who suggested that financial stress could lead to poor decision-making. Neither witness addressed the overwhelming evidence of systematic criminal behavior, and both were effectively neutralized during cross-examination. Mom broke down during her brief testimony, sobbing as she claimed that everything had spiraled out of control and that she'd never intended to hurt her children. But her emotional display was undermined when Margaret played recordings of her coldly discussing strategies to discredit Tyler and me if we continued pursuing legal action. Dad refused to testify on his own behalf, apparently recognizing that his recorded admissions of guilt made any defense testimony impossible. His silence spoke volumes to the jury about his inability to explain or justify his criminal behavior. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but her comments during the verdict reading made her intentions clear. The evidence in this case demonstrates a breathtaking betrayal of parental responsibility and basic human decency, she stated from the bench. The defendants systematically exploited their children's trust and love to fund their own selfish desires, showing no remorse or accountability for the devastating impact of their criminal behavior. The sentencing hearing drew an even larger crowd than the trial itself. Community members who'd followed the case filled every available seat, and several local news stations provided live coverage. Judge Morrison had clearly spent considerable time crafting her remarks, delivering a scathing condemnation of my parents' behavior before announcing their sentences. Richard Richardson was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Linda Richardson received 2.5 years in federal prison followed by 5 years of probation with the condition that she undergo treatment for gambling addiction. Both were ordered to pay full restitution of $237,000 plus interest, legal fees, and punitive damages. The court also ordered the immediate sale of their house and all luxury items purchased with stolen money, with proceeds going toward restitution payments. Their retirement accounts, which had been funded partially through criminal activity, were also seized to compensate their victims. As my parents were led away in handcuffs for the final time, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, and they would face real consequences for their criminal behavior. But watching the people who'd raised me being taken to prison was still heartbreaking, even after everything they'd done. Tyler reached over and squeezed my hand as we watched them disappear through the courthouse doors, both of us recognizing that this moment marked the definitive end of our childhood family. The months following my parents' sentencing felt like emerging from a dark tunnel into bright sunlight. With the legal proceedings concluded and restitution payments beginning to arrive, I could finally start rebuilding the life that their criminal behavior had destroyed. The first priority was repairing my credit score, which Margaret helped me accomplish through a combination of legal documentation proving identity theft and formal disputes with credit reporting agencies. Within 6 months, my credit score had risen from 412 to 715, opening doors that had been firmly closed during the years of my parents' financial fraud. I qualified for my first apartment lease without a cosigner, a small but meaningful victory that represented true independence from the family chaos that had defined my early 20s. The full restitution amount of $237,000, plus interest and legal fees, provided more than enough to pursue my original graduate school dreams. Columbia University's journalism program accepted my late application with a personal letter from the admissions dean expressing sympathy for my extraordinary family circumstances and admiration for my persistence in pursuing education despite systematic financial sabotage. Grandpa Wilson, whose health had improved dramatically once the stress of fighting his criminal son was resolved, surprised everyone by asking if he could move in with me. "This old house has too many memories of Richard's lies and manipulations," he explained as we toured my new 2-bedroom apartment. "I'd rather spend my remaining years with family members who value honesty and integrity." Living with Grandpa proved to be one of the most rewarding experiences of my adult life. His presence provided stability and wisdom as I navigated graduate school while also offering him companionship during his retirement years. We developed evening routines of cooking dinner together while discussing my studies and his memories of Grandma, creating new family traditions based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Tyler flourished once freed from our parents' toxic influence. With his college fund restored and additional scholarship money awarded by the university's hardship committee, he transferred to a prestigious engineering program where his natural intelligence and work ethic quickly made him a standout student. The experience of surviving family financial fraud had matured him beyond his years, and he became a passionate advocate for other young people facing similar situations. My relationship with extended family members required careful navigation as the truth about my parents' criminal behavior became undeniable. Several relatives who'd initially supported Dad and Mom quietly reached out with apologies and admissions that they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't wanted to believe it. Aunt Rebecca became a particularly close ally, bonding with Tyler and me over our shared experience of discovering family members' capacity for systematic deception. The most unexpected development was my growing relationship with Margaret Caldwell, who transitioned from attorney to mentor to genuine friend over the course of our legal journey. Her expertise in financial fraud cases and her genuine caring for victims' welfare inspired me to focus my graduate studies on investigative journalism with an emphasis on family financial abuse and white-collar crime. "You have a unique perspective on these issues," Margaret explained during one of our monthly coffee meetings. "You've experienced systematic family financial fraud from the inside, survived the legal process, and have the intelligence and communication skills to help other victims navigate similar situations." Her encouragement influenced my decision to specialize in stories about financial crimes that often go unreported because they occur within families. My thesis project became a comprehensive investigation into family financial fraud, combining academic research with interviews of other victims and law enforcement experts. The work attracted attention from regional newspapers and ultimately led to a summer internship with the investigative team at a major metropolitan daily, where my personal experience with financial fraud provided credibility and insight that traditional journalism training couldn't match. The community response to our story had ripple effects beyond our immediate situation. The local district attorney's office established a specialized unit for family financial crimes after recognizing how common these cases were once victims felt safe reporting them. 3 other families came forward with similar situations involving relatives who'd stolen inheritances, college funds, or insurance settlements while maintaining facades of financial respectability. Tyler's engineering studies focused on financial technology and fraud prevention systems, directly inspired by our family's experience with identity theft and document forgery. His senior project developed a blockchain-based system for securing educational fund transfers, preventing the type of unauthorized access that had allowed our parents to steal our money so easily. The most healing aspect of our recovery was establishing new relationships built on honesty and mutual support rather than manipulation and exploitation. Through survivor support groups and community volunteer work, both Tyler and I met people who understood the unique trauma of family financial betrayal without judgment or disbelief. I began dating again during my second year of graduate school, something that had seemed impossible during the chaos of legal proceedings and family warfare. Meeting David, a fellow journalism student who specialized in white-collar crime reporting, felt natural and comfortable because he understood the professional aspects of my personal experience without pitying me as a victim. The anniversary of Grandma's death became a celebration rather than a mourning period as Tyler, Grandpa, and I established new traditions honoring her memory. Instead of dwelling on how her inheritance had been stolen and recovered, we focused on how her values of hard work, education, and family loyalty had ultimately triumphed over the criminal behavior that had temporarily derailed our lives. My parents' prison correspondence represented the only remaining connection to our original family structure, but their letters revealed that imprisonment had not fundamentally changed their manipulative nature. Dad's letters alternated between claiming innocence and attempting emotional manipulation, while Mom's focused on self-pity and requests for financial support from the children she'd systematically robbed. Tyler and I made the difficult decision to maintain minimal contact through brief holiday cards but to refuse all requests for visits, phone calls, or financial assistance. They had 24 years to treat us like children they loved instead of assets they could exploit, Tyler observed with wisdom beyond his years. We don't owe them anything more than basic human acknowledgement of their existence. The financial stability provided by restitution payments allowed both of us to focus on our education and career development without the constant stress of survival-level poverty. For the first time in our adult lives, we could make decisions based on our interests and goals rather than immediate financial necessity. As I approached graduation from Columbia with job offers from 3 major newspapers, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed since that terrible dinner conversation 2 years earlier. What had begun as the discovery of devastating betrayal had ultimately led to justice, healing, and opportunities that exceeded our original dreams before the theft occurred. 5 years have passed since that life-changing dinner when Grandpa Wilson stood up to defend justice and family integrity. As I write this from my office at the Washington Herald, where I serve as a senior investigative reporter specializing in financial crimes, I'm amazed by how completely our lives have transformed from those dark days of discovery and legal battles. My career has flourished beyond anything I could have imagined during those desperate months of working double shifts while my parents spent my inheritance on luxuries. The investigative series I wrote about family financial fraud earned a regional journalism award and led to legislative changes in 3 states, making it easier for victims to report crimes committed by relatives and recover stolen assets. The work has given me a sense of purpose that goes far beyond personal vindication, knowing that our painful experience has helped protect other families from similar predators. Tyler graduated summa cum laude from his engineering program and now works for a federal agency developing security systems to prevent identity theft and document fraud. His personal experience with these crimes provides insights that theoretical knowledge alone couldn't match, and his innovations have been implemented in banking systems across the country. At 25, he's already recognized as one of the leading experts in his field, a success that our parents' criminal behavior inadvertently made possible by forcing him to develop resilience and determination. Grandpa Wilson, now 83 years old, remains sharp and active despite his age. Living with him has been one of the greatest privileges of my adult life, providing daily opportunities to learn from his wisdom and experience. He takes tremendous pride in Tyler's professional accomplishments and my journalism career, often saying that Grandma would be amazed by how her grandchildren turned personal tragedy into positive contributions to society. The restitution payments allowed me to purchase a house in a safe neighborhood with a guest suite for Grandpa and enough space for the family I hope to build with David, my fiancé whom I met during graduate school. Our relationship was built on honest communication from the beginning, since my experience with family deception made authenticity essential for any meaningful connection. Margaret Caldwell has become a lifelong friend and mentor who continues to provide legal advice for my investigative work. Her expertise in financial fraud cases has been invaluable as I've researched stories about white-collar criminals who exploit family relationships for personal gain. She recently established a scholarship fund for students pursuing legal careers focused on victims' rights, using her earnings from our successful case to help train the next generation of advocates. Tyler and I maintain the minimal contact we decided upon with our parents through annual holiday cards, but we've never visited them in prison or accepted their collect phone calls. Their letters continue to arrive sporadically, alternating between claims of innocence, requests for money, and attempts at emotional manipulation. Reading them serves as a reminder of how fundamentally unchanged they remain despite facing consequences for their criminal behavior. Dad was released after serving 3 years of his 4-year sentence and now works as a maintenance worker at a small factory, living in a studio apartment and paying monthly restitution installments that will continue for the rest of his life. Mom completed her prison sentence and gambling addiction treatment but remains on probation with strict financial monitoring requirements. They divorced while in prison, apparently unable to maintain their partnership without victims to exploit. The extended family relationships that survived the truth about my parents' criminal behavior have grown stronger through shared commitment to honesty and accountability. Aunt Rebecca has become particularly close to Tyler and me, often joining us for holiday celebrations and family gatherings that focus on genuine connection rather than manipulation and deception. Our story has been featured in several documentaries and magazine articles about family financial fraud, helping to raise awareness about crimes that often go unreported due to shame and misplaced loyalty. Speaking publicly about our experience was initially difficult, but the response from other victims who found courage to report similar situations has made the discomfort worthwhile. The most profound lesson I've learned is that family relationships based on love and respect look completely different from those built on control and exploitation. True family members protect each other's interests and celebrate each other's successes rather than viewing relatives as opportunities for personal gain. Grandpa Wilson's fierce defense of justice, even against his own son, demonstrated what genuine family loyalty actually means. Tyler often reflects on how our parents' criminal behavior, while devastating at the time, ultimately forced us to develop independence and resilience that we might never have discovered otherwise. They thought they were destroying our futures, he recently observed, but they actually freed us from depending on people who were never trustworthy to begin with. The financial security provided by restitution payments and career success has allowed both of us to be generous with our time and resources, volunteering with organizations that help other fraud victims and supporting legislation to strengthen protections for family financial abuse survivors. Our painful experience has become a source of purpose and meaning that continues to influence our life choices. As I prepare for my wedding next month and Tyler finishes his master's degree program, we both recognize how dramatically our lives have exceeded the expectations we held before discovering our parents' crimes. What initially felt like the destruction of our family ultimately led to the creation of something much healthier, based on honesty, mutual support, and shared values. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate has taught me that betrayal, while devastating, doesn't have to define your future unless you allow it to do so. Justice is possible when you have the courage to demand accountability, even from people you love. Most importantly, real family members are the people who stand up for you when the truth matters more than maintaining comfortable lies. What would you do if you discovered that your own family had been systematically stealing from you while watching you struggle? Have you ever experienced financial betrayal from someone you trusted? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if our story resonated with you. Subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family dysfunction and finding justice in impossible situations. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and the truth always wins in the end, even when it takes longer than you'd hoped. Thank you for listening to our story, and may your own families be built on the foundation of love and honesty that everyone deserves.